I'm going to review the most popular arm training content on YouTube.
Therefore, he has a bigger peak.
What are the best and worst triceps exercises?
Run the rack when you're training your biceps.
Use the latest science to create the perfect workout to blow up your arms.
Get those 19-inch arms.
And share with you why I think it's largely misleading and how you should focus on different aspects of training that are going to give you more results and give you the arm gains that you actually want. All right, so first off is going to be Alex Eubanks.
My friend Hattie, you'll see there's a really big gap from his elbow to where his muscle belly starts. Therefore, he has a bigger peak. The shorter insertion you have in your bicep, the more of a peak you're going to have. Like Arnold had really good peaks because he had a shorter bicep head. I have a very long insertion, meaning my bicep inserts very, very close to my elbow. So therefore, I don't get as much of a peak. Knowing that, I know that I need to train my peak more. So therefore, I do certain movements that are going to emphasize the peak of my bicep.
So a lot of detail on the anatomy of the bicep, talking about short head versus long head and how you should try to target your long head versus your short head depending on your genetics and where your insertions are.
And I might even hit the hammer curls and stuff because it's going to allow me to hit more of the brachialis, which can push my bicep peak up a little bit more. Training your biceps in a lengthened position, that's going to be like an incline bench curl. I love doing those as well. It's going to be where my shoulder is behind my body, putting my bicep in a lengthened position where I get some curls, and that trains a little bit of a different part of your bicep. It's more of the peak in my opinion, and there's going to be when you have it in front of you. Your elbows in front of you, such as a preacher curl. That's all based off of your elbow positioning.
Discussing which exercises hit the different parts of the bicep in different ways.
For triceps, you're gonna be having the 3 heads of the tricep, and you can kind of work them all in different ways. The most that I bang out the most is the long head. To train the long head of the tricep, that back meaty part, you wanna have your tricep in like a lengthened position.
Same idea here with triceps, talking a little bit about the anatomy, how doing different exercises is gonna hit the muscles differently.
Then there's the lateral head of the tricep, and I forgot what the other one's called. It's a really small one that kind of sits under here. When I want to hit that horseshoe part of my tricep, I do things like a close grip bench press or a close heavy, V-bar push down. Those hit that really good.
Hopefully this leads into more discussion of other things. I see that the video's 10 minutes long, so I'm hoping that we're going to get into some other things, sets, intensity. How often should I train? How hard should I train? How many reps should I do? How much weight should I do?
And that's pretty much it.
So the whole video is just based on understanding your anatomy and doing different exercises. Everything is around the exercises. If you want to get big arms fast, build massive arms fast with this. And then all that he ends up talking about is the anatomy of the arms, which is useful information, and it is accurate and correct. So the primary message here is that to build big arms fast, you need to understand your anatomy and you need to do a variety of different movements. There's no mention of how often should I hit the arms, how many sets should I do, what intensity should I use, what rest time should I use in between sets, what tempo should I do, for example. None of these things are mentioned, and this is typically the type of content that gets the most views, that you guys are the most drawn to. However, the exercise selection is actually a tiny piece of the puzzle that isn't going to contribute to the majority of the growth that you want to get. Pick a few different movements that work, add a little bit of variety with them, but at the end of the day, scaling the weight, using high intensity, progressing the amount of weight and reps you can do over time, scaling up your volume, doing more sets, potentially training a little bit more often, increasing your frequency, using some different tempos. These are all the factors that are way more important that you need to focus your energy on, not just what freaking exercise should I do to get big arms fast. Got another video here by Jeff Nippert.
What are the best and worst triceps exercises for muscle growth? Well, in this video, I'll be ranking 20 of the most popular movements on a tier list from S for super to F for fail. And at the end, I'll crown one exercise as the best of the best and one as the worst of the worst.
I believe Jeff Nippert does a really good job of reviewing the science and providing an objective, honest take. His content is very valuable and useful, 100%.
1, it must provide high tension, especially in the stretched position. 2, it needs to feel good, meaning it doesn't cause pain and it has a nice, smooth resistance profile. 3, it needs to have a simple progression. That means you can easily add some weight or a rep from week to week. Now, as I'm sure you know, there are 3 heads of the triceps, hence the tri prefix. There's the lateral head, the medial head, and the long head. The long head beefs up your triceps from the rear, the lateral head gives the triceps that croissant shape, and the medial head runs down the middle, adding shape to the arm as a whole. And so when we're ranking exercises, we'll need to consider which movements will emphasize which aspect to ensure proportional development. Rope press down is going in B tier. Overhead cable extension is our first triceps exercise, going in S tier. The dumbbell French press, and I'm gonna put these in B tier.
So my favorite movement, the dumbbell tricep extension behind the head, pretty much the only tricep movement that I've been able to do for the past few years, gets a pretty high ranking according to Jeff, so that is a good sign.
If I had to crown just one exercise as the best of the best, it'd have to be the overhead cable tricep extension. This exercise will grow all three heads very effectively, and it's actually been validated as a superior exercise in long-term hypertrophy studies. And if I had to pick one as the worst of the worst, I guess it'd have to be the dumbbell kickback. It's not that it never has its place, but I do think there are better options.
So overall, Jeff is doing a good job. He is a good objective reviewer of the science. His channel is very beneficial, and I highly recommend you subscribe and watch it. But I think you need to understand that it is, if I had one critique, it would be that he's emphasizing these details that are true, but don't matter as much. And personally, I would prefer to hear more emphasis or mention of, with the caveat that, okay, I've ranked all these different movements and this is what I think they are, or this is what the science shows. But at the end of the day, you could probably just pick a few that you want and showing up really consistently, pushing yourself really hard, and then scaling up your training through weight, volume, and frequency over time is probably going to lead to way more growth than hyperfixating and stressing or worrying or putting your energy into exercise selection specifically. All right, next we've got Jeff Cavalier from Athlean X.
The thing is, it's not an exercise alone that's going to do the job. It's avoiding the 5 big mistakes you're likely making right now, and that's my job to help you to figure them out now. Now
Five
look, I'm not
steps to
against
bigger
using heavy
arms in
weights
30 days.
when you train your biceps or your triceps. But if your main focus is building strength when you're training your arms, you're off track.
I couldn't really disagree more that you shouldn't focus on building strength when it comes to arm training. And for some reason, you should do that when you train your chest or your legs through the bench and squat, in that you're trying to get more weight for more reps over time. And this is one of the primary mechanisms of muscle growth, being progressive overload. And his position is that with arms, you shouldn't do that. In my experience, having experimented with, not worrying about the weight and just focusing on the pump and the burn and control or whatever else, and then other times focusing primarily on progressive overload, I've seen progressive overload and treating your arm workouts the same as you would your other body parts to be way more effective or way more efficient or impactful at leading to growth. So I completely disagree with this notion.
But what you can do is increase the effectiveness of every set you do by taking it to failure. I'm talking about all the way, not just to failure, but through failure.
So his emphasis on training to failure, I think, is important. I do agree with that. Most people don't actually train hard enough. You think you might be training hard enough, but I would say probably the number one or number two issue that most people run into when it comes to arm growth is they don't show up consistently or they don't push their sets hard enough. So I completely agree with this point. The majority of you who are watching this probably don't actually consistently push your sets with maximum intensity.
I'm talking about all the way, not just to failure, but through failure, because there's many techniques that allow this. Drop sets, in particular things like run the rack when you're training your biceps, or run the stack when you're training your triceps. Or mechanical drop sets, where changing the position of your body, utilizing the same weight, allows you to keep going beyond the point of failure from one exercise to the next in that sequence. Or even things like 21s that are prolonging the set by dividing the range of motion up into different sections. The point is, I care less about the weight that you're lifting if you're going to be leaving reps in the tank when you perform those lifts. Instead, take them all the way to failure, and I promise you, you're going to see bigger and better gains.
And I don't think you need to forget about the weight and reps that you use so that you can train with intensity. I think both things should be utilized. He's kind of saying you shouldn't worry about the weight anymore and just focus on training to intensity and use intensity techniques like drop sets and things like that. I would say focus on both. You should track some of your lifts at least, maybe not the whole workout, but the first couple movements you do for your arms, you should have some consistency and you should try to track so that you can do more weight for more reps over time. But train those movements with maximum intensity.
The next mistake you're likely making, you're forgetting all about that little muscle right there. That's the brachialis. It's a different muscle than your biceps. Now, the brachialis is a muscle, again, separate, that sits underneath that portion of the arm and actually helps to push the biceps up as it grows. To overcome the loss of bicep peak from that torn long head, I introduced a lot more brachialis training into my workouts. Throw in the fact when this muscle is developed, it's not just contributing to height, but also to the overall width of the arm, contributing to that overall fullness of that shirt sleeve. Now, there's two particular exercises that I like the most for hitting the brachialis muscle, and I'm going to include those step by step in that 30-day plan.
Okay. At this point, I completely disagree with focusing on the brachialis to get width and somehow you're missing hitting this muscle. I just don't see how you do curling movements without significantly activating the brachialis as well as both heads of your biceps brachii. I mean, I've tried this shit before too. I bought into it completely, and I think it's just complete bullshit. I think anytime you're bending your elbow, the amount that you could bias your brachialis versus your long head versus your short head is massively overstated. And at the end of the day, we all just want more meat on our bicep region here. And I think you should just think about it as bending my elbow with more weight and reps and intensity and sets over time is going to lead to this mass getting bigger.
See, a simple push-up gives us a chance later in the week to increase the volume that the tricep undergoes directly. Remember I said they have the capacity, because of all the work it does in the chest and shoulder training, to handle more than, let's say, the biceps do.
I don't really understand why the triceps are being viewed much differently than the biceps, and that we're adding in some additional volume with bodyweight exercises. To me, if anything, I've seen my biceps to recover more quickly than my triceps and be able to handle more work, just because the muscle's a bit smaller and the triceps is a little bit bigger. We're going to do some additional volume with body weight for your triceps. I don't think it's going to hurt, but I don't really agree that that's should be a mainstay in your program. I think that doing the same amount of volume for your biceps and your triceps and keeping that consistent is a better way to go.
Try this along with me. When you flex your arm, you have to be able to get it to a point where you feel almost a balling up or a cramping in that arm. There's 3 parts you have to do. You bend the elbow, you turn the forearm up or turn the hand or pinky out, and then you raise the arm up just a little bit. At that point, as I am right now, you should be feeling an intense contraction here to the point where you almost have to let it go. That cramping right there is too uncomfortable for you to maintain that contraction. Well, that gives you a good sense of the mind muscle contraction capability that you already have with that muscle, so adding weight to the exercises you're doing is going to be more productive.
So the points about muscle contraction, I think, is a good point. And I think if you're a very beginner and you don't have a good mind-muscle connection, meaning when you do a bicep curl, you are thinking about moving the weight rather than moving the muscle, meaning as I bring the weight up, you want to be able to picture and feel the muscle shortening and contracting. And as you lower the weight down, you want to feel the muscle stretching and lengthening. I think this is a somewhat useful perspective to gain. I don't think it's make or break. I think it's a tool that you should add into your kit. In that parts of your arm training, you should be trying to move heavy ass weight for lots of reps. And not really worry that much about the feel. But then I think another component later in the workout where you lighten the weight up, focus a bit more on the burn and the control, it is really important to have that mind-muscle connection.
Along with some of that additional volume through bodyweight tricep work, and combine them into one effective day. Now the next question you might ask is, well Jeff, when do I do this? If you took a basic total body split and performed it on Monday, Wednesday.
So the amount of frequency he's suggesting here to get bigger arms in 30 days, I think is completely lacking. I think that primarily hitting your biceps and triceps once a week total is not going to be enough frequency for most people unless you're a complete beginner. I think that you should have an arm day instead of just tacking them on to the end of your workout, because you're not going to have as much intensity and focus doing them at the end when you're already fatigued. And I think that you should hit the muscles twice a week, because your body doesn't need 6 or 7 days to recover from a session. There's just no way. Unless you're a brand new beginner, you've never touched a weight before, that might be a good place to start. But for most people, I think you need to be hitting the muscle twice a week. And so I think this frequency suggestion, I know he's trying to make it practical and tacking it on, I think it completely misses some of the core components of arm growth. If you really want your arms to grow, they need to have their own day, and you should be hitting them twice a week.
You're going to perform just 5 repetitions, but most importantly, taking a 3-second slow eccentric lowering of the dumbbells, and then 1 second back up to the top. You do 5 repetitions. If you do the math right there, that should be 20 seconds of work. Without resting, you immediately sit up, again, changing the position of the body in a mechanical drop set to now perform just a seated dumbbell curl. You should be able to continue because this position is going to be slightly easier. 5 more repetitions done here with that same 3-second eccentric lowering. And then you simply lean forward and now perform a drag curl. Once again, a slightly easier exercise because of the change in position of the body. 5 more repetitions, 3 seconds on the way down, 1 second up. That gives you a total of 1 minute of work. Now the drop set portion comes in by just simply opting for a lighter weight. So drop the weights that you just used, pick up 5 pounds lighter, and go through the whole sequence again.
He's really zeroing in on these intensity techniques, which I think is useful and I think will give you some growth if you just put all your eggs in the basket of intensity. We don't care about the weight. We don't really care about resting in between sets. We're just going to do these wild ass drop sets where we take the set to failure and beyond. We use these intensity techniques to shock the muscle and push ourselves to the limit with light weights. it's an effective component of your arm training, but I don't think, I've done it, and in my experience, it kind of plateaus out after a bit. If you're brand new, this will be a program that will give you some results. If you've been training for a little bit and you want to really make significant progress on your arms, I think this will be great for a month or two, and then you're going to plateau out. I think you also need to focus on progressive overload, progressing the weight over time. I think you need to train your arms a little bit more often than this. I think this is like a decent way if you don't want to spend a lot of time in the gym and you just want your workouts to be super efficient.
And as always, guys, I'm giving you the screenshots here so you can follow along exactly. Again, this does not have to be confined to just the 30 days. It has a capability of continuing to deliver the gains as long as you're willing to continue to put in the effort.
A little bit better in that we are acknowledging some of the frequency and some of the sets, and he's giving you a specific structure to follow and not just talking about exercise selection. All right, moving on to Jeremy Ethier.
And I had no idea I wasn't hitting all the arm muscles. As soon as I trained smarter, my arm growth took off. A 2023 study had subjects do either incline curls or preacher curls. Now, incline curls challenge the biceps the most in the middle, whereas preacher curls challenge the biceps the most in the beginning. The result? After 9 weeks, preacher curls led to more growth at all 3 measurement sites, especially in the bottom part of the biceps. And there's been similar findings in other muscles like the hamstrings, quads, and as you see later on, the triceps as well, which makes me relatively confident in selecting preacher curls as a top tier biceps exercise.
So we're breaking down the biceps and looking at studies of which biceps exercise seems to lead to more growth.
The biceps function to not only flex the arm, but also turn the wrists inwards. So try to start the curl with a neutral grip and then turn your wrist in so your palms face up at the top.
Just because one of the functions is to turn your palm up, doing that while training the movement doesn't necessarily make it more effective. How you actually execute the movement, as long as you're controlling the weight and using reasonable form, it doesn't really matter if you're going to twist your wrist or not, personally. I've never really seen it to make a difference for me.
Given the importance of the stretch, your arm should be almost fully extended at the bottom. But this is usually a position that most people have never trained their biceps in. So I'd highly recommend start off with lighter weight for 10 to 20 reps, and then over time you can go relatively heavier for around 8 to 12 reps.
So we do have a loose suggestion of rep range here with this one movement, 10 to 20 reps with light weight, and then bump that up 8 to 12 reps with heavier weight, just because it's a movement that puts your bicep in some stretch position. So we have some mention of a rep range.
So there's one more curl we want to do to really blow up the arms. This one will help grow not just your biceps, but 2 more arm muscles. The biggest muscle of the forearm, the brachioradialis, as well as a muscle between the biceps and triceps that can help thicken your arms, called the brachialis. Now, unfortunately, there's no direct evidence looking at how well different exercises grow these muscles. But the brachioradialis sits on the side of the forearm, so simply turning your grip to neutral will line it up better with the direction of the arm path during the curl, forcing it to do more work. This grip is also theorized to reduce the involvement of the biceps and increase that of the brachialis.
Back into breaking down the anatomy of the biceps and why some exercises are better than others again.
So the triceps has 3 heads, the medial, lateral, and long head. Now, some of these heads already grow very well from other exercises you're already doing. For example, one study published back in 2020 found that the bench press grew the lateral and medial heads quite well, but it did lead to virtually no growth in the biggest head of the triceps, the long head.
Talking about the triceps, the 3 different heads, looking at different exercises, that's, studies where, oh, this one hits this head a bit more. These people just did bench press. These people just did skull crushers. It seems like one head grows a little bit more when you do this movement.
Another recent study by Mayo and colleagues provides some insight. They had subjects do tricep overhead extensions with one arm and tricep pushdowns with the other. Similar to skull crushers, overhead extensions place the long head in a greater stretch, which, as we know from other research, seems to provide better gains. The result? After 12 weeks, the overhead extension group experienced about 1.5 times the growth in the long head. And what's interesting is that even though the lateral and medial heads weren't stretched anymore during the overhead extension, they still grew significantly more.
A very interesting study, I think this one is actually, that you have one group doing overhead tricep extensions, another one doing tricep pushdowns, and one group seems to lead to, the group with the elbows overhead doing overhead tricep extension seems to lead to more growth. This is interesting. But again, I think that we're nitpicking and focusing too much on exercise selection. We haven't talked at all about intensity, consistency, rep range, volume, tempo, rest times. I don't hear any mention of this yet.
I need to be honest with you. While all the science can definitely give you an edge, it's going to be useless if you're not nailing down the foundation. You need to push hard enough during your workouts, you need to fuel your body with the right foods, and you need to be sleeping enough. You're gonna get far better results by fixing those areas than you will with any workout.
Shout out to Jeremy Ethier here, acknowledging the truth. Although after 5 minutes of breaking down all these different exercises, we're going to mention this small caveat that if you don't train hard, show up consistently, eat healthy, rest well, none of this is going to make a difference. So kudos to him.
So here's the 4 exercises with the reps, sets, and alternatives. You can throw these exercises into your workouts throughout the week, or just have a dedicated arm day where you do these all at once.
So at the end here, we've got the official kind of workout recommendation with the sets and the reps. Personally, I would like to see more attention to detail in terms of rest time. How long are you recommending that we rest in between each set? I've seen that to be immensely impactful to growth in that part of your workout. You should use a really extended rest time so that your body can fully recover and you can push for the maximum amount of weight that you can move. That's sort of the progressive overload component. And then later in the workout, you could shorten up that rest window a little bit to do some intensity techniques to add in some more sets and volume. This is typically what is lacking in that only maybe the rep range, maybe the sets are mentioned, but the intensity level, the tempo, the rest time is not mentioned. And also, I don't think he's talking about frequency either. How often should we hit the muscle to lead to growth? And what does that look like over time? Beginners maybe don't need to train as often. The frequency could be lower. But as you progress, increasing your frequency, I've seen to be immensely impactful to spark more growth. This is the meat of the discussion of what's actually important, and I don't see that being mentioned in his arm workout at the end. But overall, I think he is doing a good job of objectively reviewing the science around different exercises and how they stimulate the arms differently. And watching a piece of content like this, if you have no idea about arm training, is useful. But the problem I think that most people take from this is that they leave the video focusing still too much on the anatomy and the different exercises, because that's what the bulk of this content is still about. However, I give him credit for slipping in the caveat that all of that shit I'm talking about doesn't really matter that much if you don't train super hard, if you don't show up consistently, if you don't have your nutrition on point, and you don't have your sleep schedule dialed in. I do give him credit for that. Lastly, we're going to move on to Ryan Humiston.
Honestly, no idea if my arms are actually 19 inches, because I'm of the opinion that if you know, you're probably a horrible person. Also, just not my personality.
So this whole thing that he's made multiple videos about the inches of his arms, 19 inches, 19 and a half inches, but then tossing shade on people who measure their arms. Like, I don't know, man. If you're super invested in training your arms, like, maybe you should monitor their growth.
Now, let's start with the mistakes. And one of the biggest ones is not giving arms their own day.
Completely agree. Not giving arms their own day is one of the biggest mistakes people make. I think if you're serious about arm growth, you need to have an arm day.
If you're not happy with the results you're getting, it just comes down to 2 things. Either you're not connecting with your biceps and triceps when you train them, or you're just not getting enough volume.
So the 2 main primary components in his mind are your connection with the muscle isn't good enough, and that you can't focus on moving the muscle rather than moving the weight. You can't feel the muscle stretching and contracting, or you're not doing enough volume, which is interesting. In my experience, I haven't seen those to be the 2 most important things. I think mind-muscle connection is kind of like a mid-level factor that you should have, but I don't think it's like absolutely make or break. I wouldn't personally put it as the number 1 priority. And then volume also, I would say, is like effective, and to a point. I've taken volume from really, really low sets, 2 sets per workout, all the way up to 100. And I think that you do see more benefit from having a bit more volume. I'm going to say in the 5 to 15 sets per workout range, but I've seen diminishing returns from that. And I've seen that using that as your primary mechanism of growth, in that I'm going to make my workouts harder and harder and put a higher demand or create more stimulus for growth on my body by scaling up my volume. I haven't seen that to be a long-term effective mechanism of growth, because once you add more sets in, you have to sustain that, and you're just going to keep adding more and more sets. I did that up to the point where I'm doing these 100-set workouts, and then you have to think about, can my body actually recover from this? And then once I'm sustaining that, where do I go from there? I think trying to scale up the weight within a consistent amount of volume is a better way to go.
It's not just part of a list you're using to judge whether or not a particular exercise is good for you that day. It should be your goal. Think of it more like a recipe, and you're trying to create the best possible connection. That means if you have to adjust the range of motion and go from full to partial reps, you do it. Or if you have to drop the weight, that way you can more effectively fire the muscle you're trying to hit and limit all the supporting muscles, you do it. And that also means you change the tempo and either increase the speed or slow down each rep.
I like how he's focusing on what is the intensity with the muscle? What is the connection in that? If I'm going to shorten the range of motion, maybe that's not the end of the world if it allows me to push a bit harder. Maybe I'm going to change the tempo, slow down or speed up. If it allows me to push a bit harder and stimulate more growth, that could be an effective mechanism. I like a lot that he's talking more about these things than just what exercise are you doing.
And I would push every single set to failure.
Every set to failure, I like that a lot. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think you could do some of your sets not to failure if you wanted, but personally, I've seen it to be more effective to push every set to failure, having experimented with workouts where I don't do that for an extended period of time and having experimented with workouts where I do that all the time. It seemed that my body personally responded better by maxing the intensity every single set.
Good fucking luck overtraining your arms. It's pretty hard to do.
Also agree with that. I think overtraining your arms is going to be difficult. I've done 100 set arm workouts, or every day is arm day, for a little while, and I never had any adverse effects. If you're smart about it and you build up to it, I think this idea of overtraining is not that significant, and I don't think it's something you need to be overly concerned about.
One thing you want to make sure you're doing is limit your rest. We're not training back or legs, so there's no reason to take 3 minutes between each set and write in your diary about how badly you were hurt. I would superset everything because I guarantee you're just not getting enough sets in. I would do sets of at least 20 on everything you do because, again, we're just trying to accumulate volume. So an example of what that would look like is rope extensions right into rope curls. And then easy bar skull crushers right into easy bar drag curls, nice and wide, nice and slow.
Love the superset structure here. This is the first mention we've seen of arm superset. I think that's the way to go, 100%. I don't love that, it's again all about the pump and the connection, and we're not really tracking weight or reps at all. I've done workouts like this, and I mean, his arms are huge. He's got 19-inch arms and I don't. So maybe I'm wrong, but I've tried this type of training for an extended period of time. I think it is effective to a point. But again, I think you're leaving gains on the table if some of your workout isn't structured towards building strength in your arms, focusing on progressive overload. I think if you did this style of workout at the end of each session where you've done the progressive overload stuff first, it is a good combination where you're kind of pairing two different worlds, one where you're really focusing on weight and reps, and another one where you're really focusing on intensity, pump, and volume.
Your whole goal is to get that muscle to fail with as many reps as it takes, maintaining the best possible connection.
Overall, I think he's giving solid advice. I think it's probably the best out of what I've seen, in that he's focusing more on these other aspects that are important. Personally, I haven't seen, focusing on the pump and the connection to be the most impactful thing, but that doesn't mean that he's wrong. Everybody is different. I would like to hear or see what his experience has been trying to train his arms like he trains his chest or his legs, where you're focused on doing more weight for more reps, and what his experience with that has been. If he's done that, maybe he has and he didn't see it to be effective, or he's just always trained his arms like this and it's worked to an extent. And again, his arms are bigger than mine, so maybe he knows something that I'm missing. But watching this video, I know that I've done a lot of workouts basically like that, and I didn't see them to be as effective as my training could be if I included some of the focus of the workout to be on moving more weight for more reps with longer rest times. Whereas this is all about connection, blood in the muscle, feel, the weight doesn't matter, move the muscle, short rest times, intensity. They're kind of two opposing approaches, and I think using both of them has personally led to more growth for me. But overall, Ryan Humiston, I think, is doing a pretty good job, and I think that from looking at other content on his channel, that he's focused more on the aspects that matter, in my opinion, which is like the volume, the tempo that you're doing, the range of motion, the rep ranges, how often to hit the muscle, all these other components that I think are like your muscle building cocktail that could potentially stimulate more growth if you mix that cocktail the best that it could be. He's definitely focusing more on that shit. So I think that's a better resource to consume content from. Whereas a lot of the other views and content that's being put out is hyper-focused on exercise selection. So the takeaway point, again, is that this information, hyper-focused on the anatomy of the arms and the exercises that you do, is useful and is a component of it, but it's vastly overstated because it makes good content, because it's eye-catching. And I've even seen this in myself. Whenever I make a video where I'm like breaking down the two heads of the biceps, people love it. But I'm like, that's not, like, you guys are getting pulled in with this kind of flashy, eye-catching video, but having seen it from the beginning to the end and lived through it, it's not the thing you should focus on. And I get it why it pulls you in, because I was there once too, and that kind of content suckered me in. Learn a little bit about the anatomy, sure, understand some movements are maybe slightly better than others, and then that's close that book, close that chapter, and then put your energy into the other aspects that I'm talking about. So I hope that that helps you to make some progress in your arm growth, make some additional gains. Have a great day. Peace.